Right, the next video. Yeah. This one is, it's God's church. It's his responsibility. If it's his church, you're going to give it to him. It's his responsibility, not yours. It's not your job to save the church, because it's not your church. Problem is, an awful lot of church leaders seem to think that it's their church. It isn't. It's his. It's always his church. That's the thing, and because it's his church, who are you going to give it to take care of it? Him. You were supposed to be a vessel, simply a vessel, for God to use to speak to his children, to lead his children. But it's his will, not yours. But his will is done through you. That's what you're supposed to be as a church leader, as a church minister. His will is done through you. Your will has to be nowhere in that situation at all. If it is, if your will starts creeping in, God's going to back off. You can't have a mixture of your will and his will. It's not going to work. Because then people will praise you and they blame God. They blame God for what you've done and they praise you for what God has done. It doesn't work. And you've got people who have spent decades trying to prevent a church from dying. Oh, and they've put in so much effort. They put in so much of their life to try and do this. Let it go. Let it go. If that church is supposed to die, let it die. There are some churches that are supposed to die, so a new church can be born from that church and can be absolutely fantastic. But you've stopped that from happening because you won't let that church die. Because you think it's your job to rescue it. You think it's your job to save that church. It is not your job. Not in any way, shape or form. It is not your responsibility. That is not what you're called to do. Nobody is called to save the church. It's his church. It's his job to save what churches he wants to save. It's his job to build whatever churches he wants to build. It's his job to use whatever people he wants to use. We are supposed to simply be his vessels. Now, look, anyone who's given their life to try and save a church and given all those years, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm sorry that you've experienced that level of pain when that church died. And I commend you at the fact that you tried. You really tried. But it wasn't your job to do that. It really wasn't. Yeah, I had that situation in that dream where I was trying. Sorry, fingers. I was trying to stop these creatures from falling to their deaths. And God says, "This represents my people, but now is not your time." I was trying. I was crying out. I couldn't do it. It was horrific. And it was terrible to know that I had no power, that I had no strength to do anything about it. I tried. I couldn't. Would I have tried for longer if God hadn't said, "Now isn't your time"? In the dream, yes. Yeah, would I have given up? Probably not. I would have been absolutely shattered before I would have given up. thing of it is, look, we've got some people in the church who are just, they are actual pastors. They are people that have that love and compassion, and they want to rescue people. They want to help people and save people. The problem is they've got, how would I say it? They've gone off the path. They've focused on people rather than focus on God. And they've seen it as their job to save these people. No, it isn't. Then there's other people that are the hero types, who see themselves as a hero, who try to take everything on their shoulders, and then end up just getting buried by it because they take too much, and they get buried by all this stuff they try to take on them to try and be the hero, everyone's hero. Again, all of it belongs to God. All of that, every single bit of that stuff belongs to God. It's His job. It's His church. Yeah, that's why I was talking about the fact of you've got pastors and their wives doing all the jobs. When you think it's your job, when you think it's your church, when you forget that it's God's church, then you're trying to basically keep that church from folding. You're trying to, do all the jobs until God provides other people to do them. He's never going to do that. He's never going to do it. If you're doing those jobs and you won't step aside, God's never going to put anyone else in there, is He? You've got to step aside. Now, when you step aside, what's going to happen? Generally speaking, God's going to sometimes not do anything for a while. He's trying to see whether you're going to rush back again, isn't He? If you still see it as your church, you're going to rush back. You're going to try and cover those positions that are now no longer covered. But if you see it as God's job, that this is God's church, you will let those positions falter. You will let them fail a bit. You won't rush in to try and rescue it. You'll trust God. Who are we supposed to be trusting? Us or God? Are we supposed to be trusting a church that people would just suddenly stand up and be counted? No, we trust God. His church. Give it to Him. As a leadership, keep on giving the church to God. Understand, it's not yours. If it's not yours, it's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is simply to do the job you're called to do. Focus on that. See, you, as a husband and wife couple, you've got to go home. You've got to have time as a husband and wife. You can't do that if you're trying to do all these different jobs. You will not have time for each other. You will not have time for yourselves. Do the job that God has called you to do. Understand it is not your responsibility. It is not your church. You don't have to save it. And even if you had all the time in the world and all the resources, you could not save that church. If God wants it to die, it's going to die. You're just going to waste many years trying to keep something up that has already fallen. It's already dead. And the situation is, as I say, sometimes churches have to die. What is a church? You think that if a church dies, that the spirit-filled born-again Christians, you think they'll have nowhere to go? They'll find somewhere. God will lead them. The churchy people, sorry, don't care. The people that just go to church because it's like a community centre. And it's a way of them listening to some old music that they used to listen to as kids and reminisce and gossip a bit. Don't care. If you don't find another church, you'll soon join a community centre and just do the things there. That's fine. Their need to be met. Let God take responsibility for his church. It's his church. Let him deal with it. His church, his job. Yeah. Of course, let him deal with it. It's his job. He's got far more resources than you. He knows every single person in it. He knows all the people that need to come in it to make it work. You don't. You're stressing for weeks, months, years, trying to keep this church afloat. Give it to God. Simple, give it to God. Yeah. Don't think for a second that if you give it to God, then because you lose control, that you lose your love for it. No. I had to give my love for, this most gorgeous, beautiful, stunning gift of a woman. My love for her, I had to give that love to God. Because loving her but not being able to love her was just too painful. I just couldn't do it. I had to give that love to God. And when I did that, it felt different. It felt as if the love had gone. It hadn't. I just wasn't carrying it anymore. It became too heavy. And that's why, even with regards to marriage and stuff like that, you've got to give it to God. Because otherwise it's too heavy. You won't be able to cope with it. There's just too much there to try and juggle and deal with. And you just can't deal with it. You've got to give it to God, trust God. As I said in the other video, you can't lose what doesn't belong to you. What isn't yours. If God has it, how can you lose it? If God wants you to keep that, if God wants that relationship to work and he has it, and you've given it to him, you're trusting him for it, you can't possibly lose it. So is your church. How can you lose it if you give it to God? You keep on giving it to God. It's in God's hands. It's not in yours. You can't lose it. But if it's meant to die, it's meant to die. The previous video, I was talking about the fact of do the job that God has called you to do, because look, it is a case that some churches are dying because the leaders are trying to keep the church afloat, and they're doing, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 jobs between 2 or 3 of them. Which means that there's other people in the church who should be doing jobs that aren't. That's why the church is dying. Well, because you're not focusing on what you should be, which is the jobs you're called to do. This is what always is remarkable about people. Anyone who thinks you can do 2 or 3 jobs as well as you could do 1, I'm sorry, but you've got mental problems. If you truly believe that you could do 3 jobs as well as you could do 1, then you've got serious issues. All this idea that women can multitask. No, you can't. Utter rubbish. Can you focus on 2 or 3 things at one time? Yes. Can you do those 2 or 3 jobs as well as you could do 1? No. You can't. Sometimes multitasking is good when you don't need to spend that much attention on those 3 items to get them done. So men can be a problem because if men, generally speaking, can focus on one thing at a time and they're focusing on something which you don't really need to focus that much attention on, well, multitasking would be a good thing there, but they don't multitask and that's the problem. But look, is it a case where men don't multitask? No. Is it a case where all women do? No. That's one of those beliefs that is not really based on reality. Yeah. But certainly from a ministerial point of view, can you do 3 jobs as well as you can do 1? No. Not in any way, shape or form. If you're called to 1 job and you're doing 2 other jobs, those 2 other jobs are going to detract from the job you're supposed to be doing. And that's going to have an impact. Maybe not straight away, but eventually. Not just on you, but on the church. It's going to do that. You've got to step back, you've got to give it to God, and you've got to say, right, Lord, what do you want me to focus on? I'm doing these 3, 4, 5 jobs. Which one do you want me to do? There's a very good chance indeed. I'd say probably a 99.9999999% chance that God is not going to say, I'll continue doing all of them. It's incredibly unlikely that that's going to be the answer you're going to get. The only thing is that when it comes down to it, no idea. What's going to happen? Quite often we hear the voice you want to hear, don't we? I did it earlier. I was it's the other way around earlier. I've spoken many times about my fingers and the fact my fingers go numb. I was trying to get the word for it, and I've heard the word once or twice, but I've just gone out my head. So I was just laying there. I said, Lord, I'm going to test our relationship. I said, can you tell me the word? What is it? What's happening with my fingers? When are they going numb? And initially, nothing. All these things that had come through my mind is what the word was. So I knew it began with C. So it's counter, something, and this, that, the other. Note, and then quiet. There's suddenly a quiet voice, compression. There you go. Okay, cool. Right, there you go. Okay. Yeah. I said to God, right, I'm going to verify it. I'm going to go online and check it out and see what it is. But yeah, compression of the nerve. Yeah, when you're doing weight training, stuff like that, and you're sort of doing quite heavy, it compresses the nerves in your fingers. And so you can have an issue with that. Yeah. But in the end, whether it be your church, your marriage, your job, your family, your children, whatever, give it all to God. Give it all to God. You gave your life to God, so everything in your life belongs to Him anyway. Everything in your life belongs to Him anyway. But you can't carry this stuff. Only He can. The Lord said, my burden is light. Take my burden. By that He's saying, give me yours and you take mine. Mine is light. Because He knows that we get burdened down with stuff. We try and control this sort of stuff. It's not humans now. It's always been the case. Always been the case. We love to have control and we love to try and control things in our lives. But when we try and do that, it's like juggling. And we're juggling too many pieces. Eventually, everything just gets squiffy and everything just falls on the floor into a complete bloody mess. We end up on top of it in tears. Stop trying to juggle with this stuff. Give it to God. Yeah, stop trying to take all this stuff. Stop trying to be the hero. Give it to God. Stop trying to save a church that's supposed to die. Give it to God. Yeah, there's a good chance that that church is supposed to live. But it might need to die before it lives again. It might need you to basically stop whacking it in the chest for it to live. Of course, with a human being, if you're trying to save a human being from death and you keep whacking that human being in the chest, you could cause an unnatural heart rhythm that can actually lead to the death of that person. Yeah, so yeah, you stop whacking the person in the chest and maybe they live. Yeah, maybe their heart will recover the whacks you've been giving it. You know? But if that church is supposed to die, let it die. Again, it's God's responsibility. The people in the church are God's responsibility, not yours. For example, a shepherd with a sheepdog. The sheepdog simply obeys the shepherd. Is the sheepdog responsible for those sheep? No, the shepherd is. The shepherd is completely responsible for those sheep. The dog isn't. The dog is simply responsible to obey the shepherd and take the sheep where they're supposed to go. That's the job of the sheepdog. That sheepdog is not responsible for the well-being of those sheep in any way, shape or form. You have some dogs that are there to guard the sheep. That's a different matter. They're simply supposed to make sure that no wolves or anything can come in and cause a problem. No wild animals can come in and take the sheep. Foxes, wolves, whatever. And people, I would guess. But will they be good as herding dogs? No. No, they're protection dogs. They're not herding dogs. Herding dogs, different matter, different job. Different training. You may have some that can do both. I don't know. No idea. But generally speaking, Border Collies not exactly would be great as guard dogs. They bark. But mine would, generally speaking, lick you to death. You've got to realise what is your responsibility, what is God's. Your responsibility is simply to be a vessel for God to work through. To minister to His children. They're not your children, they're His. It's not your church, it's His. As leaders, if leaders can realise that, they're going to be in a far better position and the church will probably function far better. Because all this, preparing a message in advance, trying to polish it up, trying to make sure it sounds all right. Again, it's you trying to look after the people. Stop trying to look after the people. Be a vessel that God can speak through. Then maybe you'll spend more time going to God over what you're going to say. Maybe you'll forget a lot of the teaching you had at Bible college. Maybe. Yeah. Well, there you go. I'm going to leave you to it with this one. I'll do the other one first, and I'll do this one because the other one was talking about the situation that leads on to this one. So there you go. You take care. God bless. I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.